Welcome to The Happy Brain, the podcast that answers your questions about the happy brain chemicals, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphin. Hi, I'm Loretta Breuning, founder of the Inner Mammal Institute and author of Habits of a Happy Brain, Retrain Your Brain to Boost Your Serotonin, Dopamine, Oxytocin, and Endorphin Levels. I hope you enjoy our show today, and if it raises any questions in your mind, feel free to send them to me, either through the contact form at the Inner Mammal Institute, which is innermammalinstitute.org, or contact me on Facebook, and you're invited to enjoy our Facebook discussion group with the Inner Mammal Institute, or my daily Facebook message on Loretta Breuning PhD page. Now, enjoy the show. Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening. I'm here today with Casey Hersch, who's a licensed clinical social worker and the founder of Light Your Sparkle. So I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more about that. Hi, Casey.
Hello, Dr. Breuning. So happy to be here.
Great to have you. So I hear you have a question for me.
I sure do. So, when we talk about stress, the concept of fight or flight is often used. Fight or flight, of course, comes from animals and how they respond to threats in the wild. What can we learn from animals for how to manage our own stress response?
Well, that's a whole book. So what can I say in 60 seconds? What can we learn from animals to manage our own stress response? Well, first, the idea is that animals are, of course, managing their own stress because they live in a world of constant threat. They could be eaten alive, they could starve to death, and yet their stress turns off after it turns on. So why does it turn off? That's the interesting question. And the answer is because they have confidence in their own choices, not intellectualized confidence. They don't anticipate the long run the way the human cortex does. But when they see a threat, they immediately focus on what can I do about it? And they focus on their next step. And I always say the gazelle focuses on its next step rather than on the lion. And if that step doesn't work, then just focus on the next step after that. So it's believing in your own steps.
I love it. That really is helpful. It's like taking one step at a time, being in the moment, moment by moment.
And you get to always have a next step. And there are many possible next steps. So you can find a joy in having a next step rather than thinking, I shouldn't have this problem. I shouldn't have a predator chasing me, or I should have an instant solution that makes the problems go away forever. Those
Right.
Globalizing answers are just leading to more stress.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
I concur. Thank you.
Well, so your website is very interesting. So you have some experience with chronic pain and chronic illness, and you try to help reach out to people who are struggling with chronic illness. And as you know, there are a lot of different approaches and discussions about that these days. And I haven't done a show on that, so I thought this would be a good time to talk about it. So why don't you give us a very, very brief introduction to how you got involved in working with chronic stress?
Yeah. So
I said chronic stress. I didn't mean chronic stress.
That's okay.
I meant
That's
chronic
part
illness.
Chronic stress and chronic illness in my life have gone together. They've been very woven together. So it's kind of one and the same on some level. So since I was 1 year old, I had many childhood illnesses, and I was also struggling with a lot of stress in my household. And so I grew up being sick a lot, seeing many physicians. And as I aged, I started to get more and more diagnoses and labels that were attached to my identity. And then finally, I was diagnosed with several autoimmune diseases, and it just kind of went on and on. And so my experience with it has been very personal, but I'm also very passionate about it because there are, over 50 million Americans who are struggling with autoimmune illness, and they're on the rise. And these are very chronic conditions. And so after many years of going through so many struggles myself, and also finding a lot of hope and a lot of empowerment, it was a time in my life to start Light Your Sparkle and start giving back in a hope that I can help others learn, grow, and have an integrated resource in their tool bags to be able to help them hopefully navigate what can be really difficult.
Good. Well, I should fast forward to the end of the story and tell listeners that I discovered on your website that your solution to chronic pain came in the form of ballroom dancing, and specifically Latin ballroom dancing. So that's really fascinating. So can you talk to people first about like the early stages of starting to do ballroom dancing?
Yeah, definitely. So as a child, I was very disconnected from my body. So there was a lot of trauma, a lot of stress in my household, and I was sick all the time. So I developed a relationship with my body that was, I just want to get out of it. I don't want to be in my body. And I didn't feel like I was even uh, part of my body. And I started playing the piano at a young age at 5. And I loved music. There was something so powerful for me to play the piano. I also, and that was healing. It helped me access my feelings, and I just connected to that at a very young age. And then I went to see a psychotherapist, and I had a strong supportive relationship with a psychotherapist. And she said, you know, it's really important to exercise. That will be a really great way for you to relieve stress. And exercise was actually helpful for illness because it boosted my mood state and got my body moving. And so fast forward to, you know, many years later, I'm a senior in high school, and I have this epiphany. My mom was very supportive. We were in a small rural community, not much access to resources, but my mom was always trying to find ways to enrich my life. And there was a small dance studio, and we both thought, if I love music so much, the piano, and I love exercise so much, and they make me feel so good, then what would happen if I started dancing? And it's like a merging of both worlds for me. So I started doing some solo, a little bit of modern, a little bit of ballet, but it wasn't until my college years that I was introduced to a social ballroom program through the Paradise Dancers, where youth taught adults how to dance. And it was part of my internship program, and I joined with those youth and Paradise Dancers, and it absolutely changed my life. And I have been just in love with it and so grateful that it's in my life every day since.
So can I ask a simple question that many people might be thinking? So do you feel pain while you're dancing?
So it's an interesting phenomenon. Probably not very interesting, but for me it is. I feel like ballroom dance is this bubble where when I step into it, there is no pain, there's no stress, it's just pure joy. And it's an opportunity for me to live my most authentic, true self. And so, interestingly enough, I can be having excruciating pain before I step on the dance floor. And then once I'm there in my environment and I am moving, listening to music, and feeling my body, I will tell you that every time I will come away from dancing and I will say, I had time where I was pain-free, I didn't feel sick, I felt fantastic. And that has been very consistent.
And then have you learned after you're finished dancing, how long does it take for the pain to come back and what triggers it?
Yeah. Well, with Crohn's disease, which is my main autoimmune condition, pain is very intermittent. There are times where I'm in a remission where the pain is a lot less, and then I'm in relapses where it can be very, very intense. So it's hard to predict when the pain will come and go. It's sometimes a low, constant, just sort of nuisance that's there. But I have definitely noticed that when you get back to life and you're back in a stress cycle and you've got your list of things you want to do, there's definitely an irritant there that can increase the pain. And then there's random events, something you might eat, something that's going on inside your body that feels very out of control.
Mm.
So it ebbs and flows for sure.
Mm. There's a lot of new information now about pain being learned, that it's a circuit in your brain, that it's learned, and the circuit builds from repetition, and you go there and you repeat that feeling because the circuit is so built. And of course it builds quickly because it's urgent because pain is a signal of urgency in your body, and that builds the circuit quickly. So the really valuable thing is to get yourself to focus on something else. So the interesting thing then would be that when you finish dancing and you look at your to-do list, let's say, that we will all connect our to-do list to the normal frustrations of life and all of our usual feelings about life that we wired in from the past. And it'd be interesting to see how you could connect your to-do list to dancing rather than to your other self, because that's the whole thing, is the circuits, what they're connected to. So if you're connecting a circuit to positive chemicals or negative chemicals, that's what you get, you know.
Yeah, and that's exactly true. There's some visual imagery that I do that actually is really helpful. That's taking what you're saying and it's putting it into action. So at times there's a lot of imbalances with the gut microbes with Crohn's disease. And as silly as it may seem, in my mind and also in many alternative practitioners, these gut microbes are these little entities that have, behaviors and actions of their own. But there's a lot of conflict in my gut between them, the good and the bad. They fight a lot. And so sometimes I will use the visual imagery of the gut microbes dancing together. It's a happy place for me. That's where my mind knows it's happy. And if I imagine those gut microbes, the ones that don't like each other in conflict, taking each other in partnership and, sharing the space in the gut on the floor.
That's great. Oh, yeah, that's a great metaphor. That's a great metaphor. Yeah. So we can always think of some metaphor, something very visual and tangible, because the mammal brain is focused on the tangible, and something we have a positive association with. Now, I stumbled on this really fascinating quote that I want to read to you, and it's about the learning of pain and being rewarded for being sick. And I just want to see what associations you might have with this. This quote comes from Charles Darwin's grandfather. And I'm very interested in Charles Darwin, and I've read a lot about his life, and anyone who has may have heard that he had chronic illness. And his theories, people probably know, but in case you don't, his theories came from a 5-year round-the-world boat ride, during which he had a really, really hard time. First, it's just dangerous. They were in a tiny boat in dangerous waters, and he had a lot of struggles with his father when he was young. And then the captain of the ship sort of reproduced his father in certain ways. And then the ship was only supposed to go around the world once, but the nutty captain of the ship just kept going and going and going. So here he was stuck with all of these harsh living conditions and danger on this boat with this creepy captain for 5 years. So whatever else problems he had, that's really going to build a lot of circuits, because it's not only real physical threat, but the food on those ships was horrible too. So he had digestive ailments the rest of his life. With all of that as background, here's what his granddaughter wrote. In my grandparents' house, which was Charles Darwin and his wife, and they had many kids, by the way. So the granddaughter's father was only one of many, many kids. In my grandparents' house, it was a distinction and a mournful pleasure to be ill. This was partly because my grandfather was always ill, and his children adored him and were inclined to imitate him, and partly because it was so delightful to be pitied and also nursed by my grandmother. She was a most remarkable woman, to outsiders appearing rather stern and alarming, and with great independence of mind, but she was also extremely tender-hearted, and I sometimes thought that she must have been rather too sorry for her family when they were unwell. A little neglect or astringency might have done some of them a world of good. Hundreds of letters of my grandmama's exist. Da, 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 da. Well, so her father grew up being sick all the time. And I speak a lot about mirror neurons and how we learn from the behaviors around us. So I'm just curious what you think that your mirror neurons took in when you were young.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a behind the scenes of disease and illness that a lot of us don't want to talk about. And that is the fact that illness is not all bad. There are psychological benefits that we extract from having illness. This is something that is personal to me, that I've taken a strong look at in my own childhood, but also something that I've seen for many years in other people's lives who have illness. So we all have this desire to be attached, to be seen, to be loved, to be nurtured. And when you're in a home struggling with chronic illness, as I was, there are roles that develop. And some of those are, if you've got a caretaking parent, they start to feel very needed, very valued. Their sense of identity starts to evolve through feeling needed, to having a purpose. In the case of Charles Darwin, and what you're speaking about, there was in the grandmother's role, she was very kind of on and off. The kids perceived her one way, but when she was in this nurturing role with her, children, she was very nurturing and loving. And so there becomes this cycle that develops within a home that's very normal, where you get your needs met. There's also just a cultural element. So within chronic illness, you can feel very isolated. You can feel like you don't belong. When I was in high school, I was sick a lot. I missed a lot of school. Well, I didn't fit in because I missed a lot of activities that my peers were doing. So pretty soon, I developed a very close relationship with my mom, where it was just she and I against the world battling this illness. And that made us very bonded and feel like a very strong sense of identity. Meanwhile, my peers at school were spreading rumors saying that I had AIDS. I was in 7th grade. It was very, very alienating for me, and it was very scary and sad. I lost a lot of friendships. So
Yeah.
we have to remember that within each home environment, illness can serve a sense of feeling compassionate, loved, nurtured, cared for. It can also become a really strong sense of identity and belonging. And the challenge is to recognize that and to realize how much of that you want to keep in your life, and how much of it is serving you in a positive way, and how much of it is really keeping you from getting better.
Yeah, that's a really good summary. And then after a person decides that, then figuring out the next step of, if a person says, okay, I don't want to have this, to say it's just a circuit. The solution is to create new circuits, and I get to choose which new circuits, but I have to choose them and I have to repeat them a lot in order for them to build. And I have to do it with positive expectations rather than saying, damn it, I'm gonna blah blah blah, I'm gonna show them. The anticipation of reward is that good feeling that builds circuits for feeling good. Great. Yeah, really good summary.
And
Good.
of course, like when the kids at school were spreading rumors about me having AIDS, that was not only devastating to me at the time, because I was struggling with chronic fatigue syndrome and a lot of misunderstood illness, but it made the unit between my mom and I much stronger, because it was like, okay, well, now we have to join together, and we have to do something to overcome this, because you develop a lot of strength from being challenged that way.
Good. Um, the interesting thing I find is when you talk to people, most people say they didn't fit in high school. So then it becomes a sort of a statistical thing of like, well, how could it be that no one fit in? So I'll tell you my theory. So first, if you visualize a big high school cafeteria and you have one table in the middle with the 8 seats, and that's like the alpha table from the animal perspective. And only 8 people can sit at that table. So by definition, everyone else is excluded. So it's the actual feeling that you need to be at that table, which creates your own feeling of being excluded. And then many people are like, well, I don't even want to be at that table. And that's the double bind of like the resentment of somehow I I'm excluded, but I don't want to be there. Well, then let go of it and don't focus on it, but you're choosing to focus on it. So why do we focus on it? And that's what's so fascinating, that in animal studies, animals focus on the alpha. They stare at them. They're always monitoring them. And so that's what high school kids do. And that's what little kids do. And that's what their parents do. So that's what mammals do. Then the interesting thing is, well, what makes them the alpha? How did they get to be in that position? And there's some interesting studies of, I don't know if well, I'll just tell you. So popularity is, in monkeys, is willingness to take risks, a network of social alliances, and the appearance of health, because those are things that motivate mate choice selection in animals and affiliations of animals who groom together and fight together. And it's so easy to see how teenage popularity is based on this appearance of strength and health, a strong social network, and a willingness to take risks. But my visual image is this table at the center of the cafeteria, is that they're laughing together. And that's sort of a teen sign of bonding. So my idea is that any 8 students can bond together, laugh together, build their own bonds, and feel good about their own bonds, rather than having their focus on fitting in with someone else. But when you try to do that, it's sort of scary, because taking the initiative to bond with other kids, and then maybe they reject you, or maybe they're a geek, as kids would say. And so when I realized that, it's like, oh, so I'm really causing this myself, because I'm the one that doesn't want to make those overtures. And I'm the one that's judging these other 7 people who could be at my table as geeks. And I'm the one that's focusing on that other table in the center. And as soon as I realized that I was creating the whole thing myself, it really eased up a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I can completely understand.
But when you're a teenager, you don't realize that, which is why I'm writing now a book for teenagers.
Exactly, because what we know as adults, if we can apply it as kids or learn the things that you're talking about now at a young age, oh, life would be so much better.
Yeah, exactly. I'll tell you a little bit about, so when I was young, my mother was always sick, and also had a lot of emotional difficulties. And she sort of leaned on me and cried on my shoulder. And that was sort of the Italian expectation, that the daughter is supposed to be the mother's support system. And I'm just saying this for listeners who may see all different variations in how these things work, So I just didn't want to be part of that whole thought mentality, but I also felt like I was condemned as a bad person for not wanting to bond with my mother in this way. So I later realized that in a way it helped me, because I didn't go along with unhealthy things in my teen years, because I was so good at saying, no way, I don't want to bond in this way. But that's the other thing about the teen years, that many young people who are popular, they do it by doing unhealthy things. Then their brains get wired at a young age to do unhealthy things, and they haven't built other skills. And so it becomes quite frustrating, and it's just as much of a challenge for the people who, quote, fit in, as the people who felt like they did, quote, fit in. And once again, when you realize this, it just eases all the pain, because you don't have to think like a victim.
Well, and I think it's the point about wiring our brains and how we develop these circuits that we take with us throughout our lives is very applicable to the idea of being in a sick role. One of the challenges I've had has been to believe that I can have a life without being sick. Because when you're sick, often you sort of have this mental image and this belief inside of you that I'm always going to be sick, and you almost don't know what life is like without illness. And I feel like, as being the sick person in my home and my mom being the caretaker, I also can understand there were times where the roles reversed and my mom was also struggling with physical issues. And I assumed that role as the caretaker for her. And so these roles just go in and out of our lives, and it can be very challenging to break those cycles, for sure.
Yes, very good. And when you talk about these roles, a lot of people have probably heard of something called the rescue triangle, which has three roles: the victim, the oppressor, and the rescuer. And once you get wired into this rescue triangle, you just see everything that way, and you think that your only choice is to be a rescuer, a victim, or an oppressor. And many people of good intentions, they don't want to be a victim, they don't want to be an oppressor, so then they have to rescue all the time because they see that. So the idea of just saying, oh, well, the whole thing is just one circuit, and there are unlimited other possible circuits in the world.
Yeah, and there's unlimited potential that each of us have. So we may be used to fulfilling one role, but we are so much more than that. And there's so much potential. I discovered that I'm a dancer and I'm an author, and I'm a lover of pets. And I mean, it goes on and on. I'm a friend. So there are so many, it's an exciting thing to know that even though you may be in this triangle and have a particular role, our brains allow us to explore limitless new potential, and it's available to us. And we are so much more than a label, a diagnosis, something that a peer is saying. We have, it's an exciting world when you think about it that way.
Yeah. So tell us more about Light Your Sparkle.
Yeah, so after years of putting together resources, seeing many different types of healers and physicians, it's very exhausting when you get a diagnostic label such as Crohn's disease or an autoimmune, and it's like, what do you do with it? What does that mean? And we take a lot of that into our identities. I'm sure most of us look at the internet, we read, we try to understand. When you don't feel well and you're overwhelmed, it's even harder to have to try to navigate this abyss of information. So part of Light Your Sparkle was designed to have a resource for folks with integration, that there's a place people can go and see that there's mind issues, there's physical, there's emotional, and there's passion, which is more joy, that it's involved in all parts of healing. And each of us can create that healing wheel, so to speak, by paying attention to each of the balances of those parts in our lives.
So what are the parts?
So the parts are that when I look at illness, I look at the healing wheel as a representation of me and my environment. And everyone has it's going to be unique for each person. But healing involves looking at the emotional components. How do your emotions and your thoughts and your beliefs affect your day-to-day living, your day-to-day health, your symptoms? Then there's physical. What's your body doing? What types of interventions are you doing in terms of supplements and nutrition and diet? And then there's all the other things that give us a purpose for life, our zest, our passions, our joys, the things that give us hope. So I wanted to create a site that was integrative, that showed that these are things that when we look at healing, they're all equally important, and the balance between them is very important. That includes traditional medicine and a lot of holistic and alternative medicine.
So the URL is lightyoursparkle.com.
Right? .life. Lightyoursparkle.life.
Oh, good. Okay. Lightyoursparkle.life. Great. Fabulous. Good. I was born with a lot of early injuries, and it was almost the opposite of yours, is they were never recognized. So I just dealt with it. So I always had a very tight, constricted diaphragm and shallow breathing. and just a lot of body tension. But that's all I ever knew. So so I never tried to do anything about it until, and I had nervous tics when I was a kid. And that was also just not acknowledged. And so it's so interesting because both paths have their challenges. And, many people, they feel like, oh, if I would have gotten more attention when I was young. But then when you get attention, you get a label, you get an identity, and you get everything's problematized. And then the focus is on that and what's wrong with me. And so, in a way, it was really good that I just didn't develop that awareness. So it wasn't until I was 50 and I heard Dr. Phil say that your body starts wearing out when you're 50, and all of the bad stuff you could get away with before then starts catching up with you. So that's when I started becoming more aware of all of these things and looking into body work. And each one of them had often a belief system that came with it. And I felt a lot of pressure to embrace that belief system. And I didn't want to, because if I'd made it till 50 without anybody forcing their belief system on me, I was not about to succumb to one then. But, I really understand why people like to have a new worldview, because it allows you to shed one that you don't like. But just lucky for me, I happen to be living near this place, doesn't exist anymore, where they gave a free sample lesson in a different kind of body work every hour of every day. They had this just constant schedule in this activity room, and you could just go there and sample all different kinds of body work. So that was really good for me, because it allowed me to try the whole variety and sort of see what they all have in common, instead of having to adopt one religion.
Yeah. Well, and what an incredible experience for you, because I feel like what we miss sometimes is perspective. We get caught into these models of the way that the body's supposed to be, the way we're supposed to think, and exposure to different ways that we can experience ourselves allows us to start to grow and learn more about who you are. And the more you figure out what you gravitate towards, what feels good, how your body and your emotions respond in different settings, the more empowered you have over your life, and especially over health. It's a huge part of it.
Yeah. Well, so I really like that about Light Your Sparkle, because you were really open to any particular way that a person wanted to approach it, rather than just selling one approach. So very good.
There's no one size fits all. And I know what works for me, but that's just one example of many things that work for each person, and figuring out your own ingredients.
Yeah. Because our happy circuits are built from our unique experience, and our unhappy circuits are built for our unique experience. And it's so hard to build new circuits that building on the branches that you already have is so much easier. And that's what we sort of all tend to do.
Right.
Yeah. Great. Well, I'll just tell you one interesting example of how I built on a circuit I already have. So when I was in high school, I really wanted to earn money. And I managed to get a job at the Penny Saver. So if people don't know what the Penny Saver is, it was sort of like the Craigslist of the 60s. So it was like a cheap newsletter, free news flyer with ads. And there were want ads and also display ads for local shops. And I got paid an enormous amount of money in my 16-year-old eyes to make the ads for these local shops. And so it was like I had like an adult job after school and on weekends, and I just loved it because it got me out of the house. I got rich, and I went to Paris with the money. So I have like all positive associations for that. So after I wrote a book, there's a lot of expectation that you have to promote the book. And academics are very anti-promotion, and I had no life experience with self-promotion either. And so I learned to see it from the perspective of graphics, that I loved making these little ads for local shops. And so I just focused on the little ads that I was making for my books and learned to love making the graphics that went along with my promotion, and helped to feel good about it in that way. So, and you built on your early strength circuits, and people can think about their own early experience and think about what strength circuits they have.
I'm going to second that strengths that you have as a child and the things that you love are indeed the things that are still your strengths into adulthood and that you draw from. And
Yes.
that's been at the heart of my life, just knowing what those strengths are and just using them to overcome the obstacles and feel really good about myself in the process.
Yeah. Well, it was so much fun talking to you, Casey. I should mention one other thing. When you talked about paradise, people may have noted that word, and this is literally the Paradise, California, where the fire was. So, do you have anything to share about that of particular interest?
I do. Paradise Dancers, of course, the group that I started my passion for ballroom dance with, is struggling because the dance studio was burnt to the ground. And I did my internship there as a social worker. All of the amazing community that exists is still there, but they're definitely struggling with all the loss. And so any support that any of us can give them in helping to rebuild is just from my heart so important. Absolutely. And I love Paradise, and I love you, Paradise Dancers, for everything you've given me. So, and the community, phenomenal community.
Good, great. Well, it was really great talking to you, Casey. Take care.
Likewise.
We'll go light our sparkles. Bye.
It was great to have you with us today. We hope you'll keep learning about your inner mammal and keep checking out the resources of innermammalinstitute.org. We have books, videos, blogs, and graphics that will help you build power over your mammal brain. Help us spread the word by reviewing and subscribing to our podcast and checking out our books and videos. And do join us live on Sundays so you can ask your questions about rewiring your happy brain chemicals. Details at innermammalinstitute.org/podcast.